Nobody wins, everybody loses, but the players did have a chance to take legitimate deals.
Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, and Tony Pollard all failed to land long-term deals. Three of the best players in the entire league, regardless of position.
I don't want to point the blame finger at Saquon Barkley or any running back. It's just an unfortunate reality, and it seems like we really didn't have much of a choice but to take this course of action. But since the last time we made a video on this situation, a lot has occurred, and the result is kind of depressing, I'm gonna be honest. So before we get to the content, we're giving away $1,000 split between 5 subscribers that turn on their notifications on this channel. We're gonna announce the winners on the community tab. And now that we get all that out of the way, work! Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? The last time we made a video, we discussed the fact that running backs were currently in trouble. Both Josh Jacobs, who was coming off of a career year for himself after the Las Vegas Raiders mistakenly declined his 5th-year option, ended up getting the franchise tag from the Las Vegas Raiders. The same could be said about Saquon Barkley, coming off of a career year for the New York Giants, and he also got the franchise tag. Following this, running backs were kind of confused about what to do. Josh Jacobs led the NFL in rushing last season, yet he just got the franchise tag. Saquon Barkley was 4th in rushing yards last season and had a remarkable season in his own right. You would think after having seasons like this, they would get rewarded with a huge contract extension. But no, Dalvin Cook just came off of his 4th straight year making it to the Pro Bowl in his healthiest season to date, and the Minnesota Vikings released him. So something clearly is going wrong here. Now, in the past, I've mentioned on this YouTube channel that historically you never really needed a dominant running back in order to make it to the Super Bowl or win a Super Bowl. I mean, I've shown you this chart ad nauseum. Technically, this chart is cheating because during the year that Percy Harvin was the Super Bowl leading rusher, the Seahawks technically had Marshawn Lynch under contract, but I digress. Following the fact that both Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs didn't get a contract extension, we found out that veteran running backs have organized a group text chain during which they have been commiserating about the current market at the position and brainstorming regarding strategies for improving the situation. And their first course of action? Well, as of last Monday, their plan was to complain about the situation on social media, which some of them did. Ultimately, they need the league and the NFL Players Association to recognize the problem and to fix it. Problem is, if you remember a couple of years ago, you wouldn't see running backs drafted in the first round of the NFL draft at all. That's come back. Why? Well, the main reason why, and I want to say this is from 2016 and on, or maybe actually 2015 and on, Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon's year. Prior to that, you didn't really see running backs get drafted in the first round. The one change is the realization that if you draft a running back in the first round, you get 5 years of them on a rookie scale contract. Yeah, you might have to pay them the amount that Bijan Robinson's getting paid, but after those 5 years, if they're still productive, you can franchise tag them for 1 year. That gives you 6 years. And then you can franchise tag them for another year. That gives you 7 years. By then, at that point, you got 7 years of that running back. You no longer need him anymore. No running back typically makes it that long in the NFL to begin with. And that's the current trend that teams have been taking. Now, of course, there are times where teams make mistakes. Like in the case of the Las Vegas Raiders, they really didn't have any faith in Josh Jacobs, so they declined his option last year in the offseason, which allowed him to hit free agency early, and then he led the league in rushing, and now he got franchise tagged. Now, I have mixed feelings about this, because on one hand, is it necessarily the worst thing when you're getting paid $10 million per year of your productivity? On the other hand, I could understand wanting long-term stability whenever you're playing a position that suffers the most contact in the entire NFL. Now, these NFL running backs would complain on social media, primarily in the form of podcasts. You had Austin Eckler discussing how he believed it was very hypocritical of the LA Chargers not to pay him what he was worth, despite them refusing to trade him because they weren't getting adequate draft compensation. Watch.
Not good for our running back market as far as capital coming in. It's putting like a ceiling on it. No new comparables that are actually relevant because there's been a set number set on guys. From a player's aspect, we have no control of that. Really, who we want answers from is the ownership. Like, why are you doing this? What's the reasoning? Like, I don't know. Maybe they're just testing us. Like, hey, let's see what happens. You're gonna make us have to do something. Understand they're trying to fight for value to make sure, hey, let's try to get the most out of we can at the cheapest. We're out there carrying the ball for you 400 times a year, right? Scoring all your touchdowns. I don't see how they can justify not giving our guys contracts. They can bring up the injury thing. I don't care what position you look at. There's positions, every position gets injured. Whether it's right or wrong, now is for us to decide. It's just business for them. It's just business for us too. You're gonna have to trade some high picks for me. The Chargers, they weren't gonna let me go for anything that wasn't up there. So they saw my value there. It's allowed me to trade. They're like, okay, but we want you to get these types of picks, which were not low picks, but we're not going to pay you like you're that type of player. Where it's like, oh, if you're going to get traded, you got to get traded at this level. But if we're going to keep you, we're going to keep you down here at this level. So you can see for them, yeah, that makes sense because they're getting the best of both worlds there.
Now, this is where things are officially hitting the fan. Because there was a Zoom call on Saturday between many running backs in the NFL. And we found out the list of the running backs that attended. You had Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb, Najee Harris, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, and J.K. Dobbins. Some of these players have already been paid. Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, and Nick Chubb all got contract extensions. However, if you take a look at the amount these players are earning, it's more or less the same amount that you would have made if you were franchise tagged for 2 years straight. For example, Nick Chubb is making $10.8 million this year, with $3 million due at signing. They could potentially cut him after this season, by the way. If not, then he'll be on the books for $11.7 million in 2024. Christian McCaffrey has a similar type of contract. The Zoom was initiated by Austin Eckler, who organized it, and they discussed all sorts of things to try to get their leverage back. For example, the issue of holding in by exaggerating or fabricating injuries was discussed. Multiple sources tell Mike Florio the details of the meeting. Much of the focus eventually went to agents. Even though agents were excluded from the call, there was concern raised per PFT about some agents creating false expectations for other running backs by dumping phony salaries into the back end of contracts, which is something that I guess the best example I could give you is, you remember when the New Orleans Saints signed Taysom Hill to like a 4-year, $150-something million contract, but it was all incentive based with incentives that were impossible to get just to troll the entire world? They were pretty much accusing their agents of doing that. The messed up part is what Nick Chubb would say during this meeting when he got up and said, right now, there is really nothing we can do, kind of handcuffed with the situation. We're the only position that our production hurts us the most. If we go out there and rush for 2,000 yards with so many carries, the next year they're going to say you're probably worn down. It's tough. It hurts us at the end of the day. And throughout NFL history, there's been instances for these running backs to break the mold, to break the stereotype. And unfortunately, they just weren't able to do it. I mean, my favorite example is the 2014 NFL season with DeMarco Murray. In that season, DeMarco Murray had 392 rushing attempts, rushed for 1,845 rushing yards, had 13 touchdowns, and averaged 105.3 yards per game. And ultimately, the Cowboys didn't want to re-sign him. They actually let him go to the division rival Philadelphia Eagles. Following one horrific year with the Philadelphia Eagles, where he was placed in Chip Kelly's offense, where he just didn't fit into the scheme at all whatsoever, they tried making DeMarco Murray a zone rushing halfback as opposed to a halfback that runs in between the tackles. So that failed miserably. He would go to the Tennessee Titans. He would have a brief career resurgence for a year until 2017, where the Titans went from DeMarco Murray to Derrick Henry. And that's the best example. The Raiders essentially attempted the same thing with Josh Jacobs this last year. And it's kind of crazy. If you look at the amount of rushing attempts that Josh Jacobs has had throughout his career, and then the amount that it's elevated to over this past year, you could tell that the Raiders were thinking,
we're not going to have Josh Jacobs with us that much longer. Let's just run him to the ground.
If you compare that to a wide receiver that exceeds 2,000 receiving yards, that man is going to get maxed out. He's going to get a contract that pays him north of $30 million a year annually for sure. So Nick Chubb is right in this instance. And here's the thing, you would think that all of this drama, all of this fabricating of injuries, all of these threats from Saquon Barkley that, hey, I have leverage on you guys, I'm not going to show up to camp. You would think this would work, but man, the way this ended was so freaking depressing. How did the New York Giants react to this? this? Well, all they had to do was sign James Robinson. James Robinson signed with the New England Patriots during the offseason, but in training camp, after a few OTA practices, it was clear that James Robinson wasn't the explosive halfback that he once was. Truly unfortunate. He was a really good running back before his injury, and that was very apparent with Jacksonville. So once again, he was a free agent. All the New York Giants had to do was sign James Robinson to a one-year contract and just act like they were going to go into the season without Saquon Barkley. But we found out that Saquon Barkley and the New York Giants agreed to terms on a new one-year deal worth up to $11 million. Barkley gives himself a chance to earn more than he would have on the franchise tag, and he also gets a $2 million signing bonus. But most importantly, he's coming in and will be at training camp. He doesn't have a choice at this point. So Ari Meirov actually compared the two. Saquon originally could skip camp, had $10.1 million in earnings, no signing bonus, and $0 in incentives. Now he agreed to reporting to camp, $10.1 million in earnings, $2 million via a signing bonus, and $909,000 in incentives. The max he could make is $11 million. Man, I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and say Saquon did something wrong. I'm just gonna say this is a very sad conclusion to what they were protesting for. Bear in mind that he also didn't get a no franchise tag clause, meaning the Giants can tag him again after this season, and that's what a source told Adam Schefter. And I'm not saying Saquon did anything wrong, because if I was in his situation, man, I probably would have done the same thing. He doesn't really have a choice at this point. This was the best the Giants could do, and it's either that or you take the Le'Veon Bell route. And you saw what happened to Le'Veon Bell. He went an entire season without playing for the Steelers, ended up signing with the New York Jets, was a shell of his former self with the New York Jets, ended up losing money on the fact that he did such a thing, thinking that he was going to change everything for running backs. And he even recently said that he made a horrific mistake leaving Pittsburgh. It's unfortunate, man. I mean, for running backs, but the fact of the matter is, you don't really need a good running back to be successful as an NFL team in today's NFL. And that's just the bottom line. It's a sad conclusion to the story, especially when you compare what these players are getting now to what Adrian Peterson was getting in his career. I mean, Adrian Peterson's contracts were looking better than what Saquon Barkley and today's running backs are getting. And this is a man that played in the early 2010s. So how do we resolve this issue? Well, there's three resolutions. Either one, the NFLPA needs to make quarterback contracts separate and give quarterbacks a separate salary cap for their contracts. Two, they could redo the way running back rookie contracts work, where say instead of them being signed to a 4-year plus 1 deal if they were drafted in the first round, maybe they only get them for 2 years or 3 years. I don't really know. And three, the most aggressive thing you can do, and something that I actually suggested in my last video, is running backs need to reclassify as wide receivers, and they need to build a separate skill set. I mean, if you remember when Deebo Samuel was negotiating a contract extension with the San Francisco 49ers, they called him a wide back for a while. And he came out and said that he doesn't want to play the running back position, primarily because he doesn't want to hurt his value as a player, and he doesn't want to make significantly less money for doing so. Wide receivers can make north of $30 million a year, whereas running backs are currently making about $11 million a year. Let me know in the comment section down below, do you agree with Saquon Barkley's decision? Would you have done something differently? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.